Hey yo, what is up? Welcome to Ninja Geek Games. Dark Souls is a deep and thematic card game set in the undead world filled with powerful enemies, magical items and death. In the card game you'll take on the role of a heroic character where you need to explore encounters, fight enemies, gain treasures and collect souls. The essence of the game revolves around building your deck with powerful items looted from defeated enemies, as well as stamina cards paid for by souls of the dead. Careful management of this deck is required as it represents your health, run out of cards and you are defeated, only for the dungeon to reset, as well as the loss of gained items and souls. In this video we'll go over the rules of the game that will include both expansions, Forgotten Paths and the Seekers of Humanity. The game still sits in my top 5 games, but I do think the addition of the expansions makes a good game great, as they include additional cards for encounters, enemies and treasures, as well as additional mechanics that you'll see next. However, I do think the rulebook is disjointed and a little unclear at times, so hopefully this video helps you out. So let's light the bonfire and prepare to die. Okay, the first thing to note is that Dark Souls, the card game, is a bit of a table eater, especially at 4-player. This playmat is actually from another game, Veilwraith. It's not required, but the artwork fits the theme of Dark Souls. I do suggest you check out the earlier video for Veilwraith, as it's another very good card game. First, you need to set the battle boards for the heroes and the enemies adjacent to each other. And these are where the enemies move about and fight during an encounter. Then each player will select one of the heroes available to them. And I'm selecting the Tin Knight and the Spicy Pyromancer. Each of the heroes has a unique deck of 28 cards that you'll need to locate. They can be identified by the matching symbols on the cards and the hero card. And these contain weapons, stamina and equipment you'll need to fight the enemies. The party will then need to decide which exploration board they're going to use, noting that they're double-sided. This is the bonfire icon that represents where you start the game, rest, revive and gain equipment, as well as toasting marshmallows if you see fit. These areas are for the encounters that you'll face in the game, and these are the 2 bosses that you'll need to defeat in order to win. All of these areas are linked by paths. Now we'll need to separate the encounter cards by level into 3 decks for level 1, level 2 and level 3. And these indicate which enemies you'll be facing during an encounter and how many treasures you'll loot if you win. Now to save table space, because the encounters on here remain constant throughout the game, I'll just draw them now so that I can remove these decks from the game. We'll do the same for the enemy cards by separating them by level. So we have level 1, level 2 and level 3. Next we'll need to find the boss data cards that correspond to the bosses on the exploration board. And these are Vord and Pontiff Sullivan. Each of these bosses also has a unique set of behaviour cards, and I'll place them up by the exploration board. The common and transposed treasure cards need to be separated and shuffled, and you can identify cards for each deck because the transposed have a blue dot above the treasure icon. And I'll put the common treasure cards here and the transposed treasure cards over here. There are 5 bonfire cards that will need to be stacked in ascending order, with 5 at the bottom and 1 at the top. The icon and number in the bottom left corner shows you your maximum deck size. And these will need to be placed near the encounter board. Next we'll need to separate the stamina cards to create a market area. The cards are separated both by cost and stamina type. So these here are the 2 soul cards, and these are the 5 soul cost cards. And you should end up with 8 decks. The Remnant of Humanity cards can be placed near the market area, and these act as a kind of deck filler. Now when playing with the Seekers of Humanity expansion, you need to add 5 Ember cards to the common treasure deck. So 5 of these will need to be added to this deck. Then you'll need to take all the invader tokens and randomly select a number of tokens equal to the number of players in the game. So in this instance, 2. But what I'll do is place them into a bag and draw from this. And we've drawn Paladin Leroy and Knight Slayer Sorig. Now the backs of these cards show which enemy level deck they belong to. And here it shows level 3. So we need to shuffle these 2 cards into the level 3 enemy deck and remove these tokens from the game. We then need to place the remaining invader cards, corresponding invader behaviour cards, and their unique treasures to one side, together with the invader tokens. As we're playing with the Forgotten Paths expansion, we need to separate and shuffle both the trap deck and the terrain deck. And lastly, we've got a number of tokens that include souls, cleared encounters, enemy damage and conditions that we're just going to place off camera. And now we're set up and ready to play, we can explore this land of darkness. Now both expansions provide elements that can be added straight into the base game. There are 4 additional heroes with unique decks, as well as encounter, enemy and treasure cards that can all be shuffled straight into their respective decks. You'll also have more choice with the exploration boards, each with 2 bosses and their associated data cards and behaviour cards. The Forgotten Paths expansion includes mechanics for traps and terrain that we'll discuss during the encounter setup, and the Seekers of Humanity expansion includes phantom invaders that are unique enemies, but we'll discuss the use of these towards the end of the video. So the game begins with you or your group choosing an encounter on the exploration board and fighting the revealed enemies. Survive and you gain the loot, where you can continue to the next encounter without refreshing your deck or choosing to rest at the bonfire to gain equipment and spend those souls. However, if at any time one player is unable to draw from their deck, the whole party is defeated and you must return to the bonfire, where you lose your hard-earned loot. Whether you rest at the bonfire by choice or defeat, a few things happen. 1. The dungeon resets. 2. You reshuffle all your cards to create your deck. And 3. The bonfire diminishes. You'll need to defeat both bosses before all the bonfire cards are discarded to win the game. The first thing we need to do is select one of these encounters, and they're separated into 3 levels of difficulty. Now as we start at the bonfire, we can follow these paths to any of these encounters, except this one. Once selected, we flip the card to see what enemies we'll be facing in that encounter. Now as we're using the Forgotten Paths expansion, the first thing we need to do is check to see if there are any traps or terrain on our location. If the encounter shows a terrain symbol, we then need to draw a terrain card, where its effect remains active for the entire battle. Not only that, this terrain card will be active every time we face this encounter. Now if the encounter card shows a trap symbol, we need to place a number of traps equal to this number on the player board. So in this instance, 2. To place traps, we draw 1 enemy from any of the decks and place the drawn trap face down in the enemy target attack area. So this is 1, 2, 3 on the top row, we placed here. As there's more than 1 trap, we draw again. But if the enemy card shows an area attack, we'll need to draw until we get a single attack area to place our drawn trap. And these are placed face down. If the target area ever indicates a space that already has a trap, you'll need to draw another enemy. And the drawn enemy cards need to be shuffled into their respective decks. And only then can heroes be placed on any space on the hero battle board, with 1 hero maximum on any space. Each hero will then draw 6 cards. And if they happen to have no weapons, they can shuffle their entire hand of cards back into their deck to redraw another 6 cards. However, you must then keep that second hand. Now we can refer to the encounter card to see which enemies we'll be facing during this battle. As we're playing with 2 characters, we look along this row and see that we're facing 2 level 1 enemies. And as you increase player count or encounter level, you'll be fighting more or higher level enemies. This treasure icon here shows how many treasure cards we'll get for defeating the encounter. We'll draw enemies one at a time and place them on empty areas on the enemy battle board. And to do this, we'll examine the enemy spawn area here that correlates with the enemy battle board. Therefore, this enemy is placed in column 1 on row 2, and the second enemy drawn is placed in column 3 on row 1. Now there is an update to the next rule. Previously, if an enemy was going to be placed in a row that was entirely occupied, the enemy would sit out to the side until there was room. The new updated rule indicates that this enemy can now instead be allocated to any empty space. Before we look at enemy activations, we'll briefly look at the enemy and hero card info. This indicates the enemy level, and this indicates whether it's part of the base game or an expansion. This is the defense value, where the enemy can absorb damage before taking hits. And this is the enemy's health value. This symbol indicates the enemy attack value, and this its weakness. In the top right is how many souls are earned on defeating the enemy. We've already discussed the spawn points, but this top area correlates to the player battle board and where the enemy will attack. Now the hero decks are made up of equipment consisting of weapons, armour, accessories and stamina that are actually used for paying for equipment actions. There are 4 different types of stamina, and each equipment card requires different values of stamina to be spent to carry out its actions. And most equipment cards provide different options on how the stamina can be spent for actions. This first column indicates how the card will be used, which I assume relates to normal and heavy hits. This icon here means that when the equipment is used, the card stays in the player's hand. However, this downward pointed arrow icon means that once these actions are used, the card must be discarded. This column indicates how much and of which type of stamina must be spent to carry out the action. Therefore, in this example, I'd need to spend this stamina to carry out the top action, where I keep the card at hand, or if I chose the bottom action, I'd need to spend this stamina but discard this card. This symbol here means I can spend stamina of any type. Once stamina is spent, regardless of whether it was a normal or heavy hit, stamina cards are always discarded. This column indicates defense and how much damage from enemies is reduced, and the icon in this column indicates how much damage the equipment does when the action is used to attack an enemy. Now, some equipment cards have a bow symbol in the last column, and this means the equipment can be used at range. But for any of these actions that are carried out, you can only choose one of the action modes to use. Once the encounter is set up, battle can begin. First of all the enemies activate and attack, where heroes do have the opportunity to block and dodge, and then all heroes will activate, taking various actions. This goes back and forth until all enemies are defeated or one or more heroes are unable to draw from their deck. During enemy activations, all enemies will attack, and the attack order is based on their position on this battle board. The order of activation starts in the top left, moves across the top row, and then across the bottom row. Therefore, in this example, enemies attack in the following order. First, the firebomb hollow, then the rupturing hollow, then the large undead dog. Woof. And an enemy will attack any hero in its target area. This icon here will show which area on the player battle board the enemy will attack. If there is no hero in this space, it will attack the hero with the highest taunt value in this row. If, for example, there were no heroes in this row, this enemy would now attack the hero with the highest taunt value in the next row, which is now the knight. The taunt value is indicated in the top left of the hero cards. So to attack, the enemy deals damage equals to its hit value, which indicates damage. Some enemies, such as the rupturing hollow, attack multiple areas shown in orange, which would indicate this area here. For these area attacks, only heroes in the specific area are dealt damage, where if there were none, the attack would miss. Now, heroes that are attacked are dealt damage equal to the enemy hit value. That is, unless they can find a way to reduce or even negate that damage. For each enemy attack, a hero can use armour, robes, shields, for example, to defend itself. So in this example, the Hollow Swordsman target area indicates the pyromancer's space. The swordsman has a hit value of 4, and therefore the pyromancer should take 4 damage. Now, as heroes can play defensive equipment during enemy attacks, the pyromancer is going to use the round shield. And the pyromancer has 2 options. They can use the top action, where the card would remain in hand. It costs 1 stamina and would reduce the damage by 2. Therefore, the pyromancer would take 2 damage instead of 4. However, using the second action would mean the pyromancer would have to discard this card, and it costs an additional stamina of any type. But this symbol here means that the attack is completely evaded and no damage is dealt whatsoever. The sneaky pyromancer manages to dodge out of the way of the attack. If there is any damage remaining from the enemy attack, the hero suffers that many hits. To reflect this, the hero must remove 1 card from hand or their draw deck, player's choice, for each remaining hit and place it in their discard pile. So in our example, we'll assume the pyromancer used the top action to reduce the damage by 2. They now suffer 2 wounds instead of 4 and must discard 2 cards, and they'll choose 1 from hand and 1 from deck. Once all of the enemies have activated, the heroes then get to activate. During the hero activation, players work together to move about the battle board, draw and discard cards, and make attacks. There are a number of actions a hero can take, but each action can only be taken once per activation. The first action is discard, where a hero can discard any number of cards in hand to draw that many cards from their deck. All heroes are able to use the heroic ability printed on the front of their card. This can only be used once per encounter and is only refreshed when resting at the bonfire, so use wisely. Note that some of these abilities can only be used in the enemy activation. Heroes can also take a move action where they can move 1 space on the player battle board, and this can be forwards, backwards, left and right. But they must remain on the player battle board. Heroes cannot move diagonally, but they are able to switch positions with another hero. However, doing so uses the movement action for both heroes, so neither of them can move again this activation. If a hero moves onto a trap card, the card is flipped, the trap effect is then activated, and the card is removed from that encounter. The hero can also use 1 non-attack action on an equipment card, such as healing, where you can move this many cards from the bottom of your discard pile to the bottom of your draw deck. Lastly, the heroes can make an attack action. To make an attack, a hero must select an enemy that's in the same column that isn't blocked by any other card. So in this example, the knight is able to attack the silver knight swordsman, but the pyromancer doesn't have any valid target because the knight is blocking line of sight. However, if the pyromancer attacks with a ranged weapon, they can target any enemy in its column, or the pyromancer would need to move. To make an attack, the hero must select a weapon and one of the actions and spend the required stamina to carry out that action. Remember, any stamina that is used to pay for an action needs to be discarded, as well as the equipment card if this action is used. Otherwise, the equipment card would go back into the player's hand. The enemy would then suffer damage equal to the hits of the weapon minus the defense value of the enemy. So in this instance, the knight uses the middle action and scores 2 hits. Silver Knight Swordsman has 1 defense value, meaning it takes just 1 damage. If the number of damage tokens on an enemy card equals or exceeds its health value, the enemy is defeated and removed from this encounter. The enemy is then placed in a loot area where the souls are collected if the heroes are able to defeat this encounter. Now, as this is a cooperative game, players work together to overcome the encounter. To represent this, there is no turn order, and any hero can carry out any action at any time as long as they only take that action once. So this means the knight can move, the pyromancer could then make an attack, then move, the knight could then play a non-attack equipment card such as healing, and then make an attack. Now, some hero attacks and enemy actions have additional abilities that we'll take a look at. And these special abilities give certain effects and conditions when the attack is made. Some attacks, as shown here, show a push symbol that results in the target being pushed back one space. If there is another character in the space the target is being pushed to, they switch places. But this doesn't count as a movement. Now some attacks show a shift symbol, which means that after the character has performed an action, they can move this many spaces. And again, this doesn't count as movement. Other attacks cause conditions where the relevant token is placed on the target of the attack, even if the attack dealt no damage. If the attack showed a bleed icon, this means the next attack against this target deals 1 additional damage. If a character has suffered frostbite, they are dealt 1 damage the next time they move. If poisoned, the character suffers 1 damage the next time it's activated, and stagger means that that card will take a damage the next time it attacks. And these tokens are removed as soon as that effect takes place. It's important to note that any character, enemy or hero, cannot have more than 1 token of the same kind on its card. So if the knight was dealt another bleed action, we ignore it. Lastly, some attack actions can share an attack type that indicates heavy, precise, skilled or magical attacks. And these are indicated on the equipment cards in the top left corner. If the target enemy's weakness matches the attacking weapon's type, then this attack will bypass the enemy's defense, where the enemy will then take the full damage of that attack. Likewise, if a pyromancer uses a spell with the magical symbol against an enemy with a magical weakness, the enemy is unable to use its defense value. Once the heroes have carried out all the actions they can, play moves back and forth between enemy activation and hero activation until the heroes defeat all the enemies on the enemy battle board, or a hero is unable to draw a card from their draw deck. As mentioned, the encounter can end in victory or defeat. If victorious, there are 2 options where you can continue exploring or rest at the bonfire. Regardless of which is chosen, any traps that are not triggered during that encounter are tucked beneath the encounter card in case you wish to decide to explore that card again. The same would happen with any terrain cards that are in play. The party then gets souls equal to the soul value on all of the defeated enemy cards, in which this case this is 7, as well as drawing cards from the top of the treasure deck as indicated by the encounter card. Now all souls collected and treasure cards are placed in a potential loot area. If there are already souls and equipment in this loot area, those are moved to an inventory space and are now deemed safe, where your newly gained assets can sit in the loot area. Now the loot and inventory spaces are just areas on the table that players mark out for themselves. And moving items from the loot into the inventory means that if your party is defeated, any souls and items in the inventory space are not discarded. If you decide to continue exploring, an encounter cleared token is pasted on the encounter you just defeated. The party can then choose any encounter on the board that is linked to the encounter they just defeated by paths or linked to the bonfire. So on this exploration board, the party could choose to travel to here. We will then go through the encounter setup again. It's important to note that when starting another encounter without resting at the bonfire, players do not shuffle their discard pile into their draw deck. You need to take on this encounter with what cards you have left in your draw deck, and this is where the careful hand management comes into play. Note that to explore any of these boss areas, the party is required to explore and defeat at least 1 encounter card before reaching that boss, so be warned. Now if the party chooses to rest at the bonfire, all encounters except boss locations are turned face down and they'll need to be explored again. This is true for all encounter cards, but not the boss locations. If you manage to defeat a boss, this encounter space remains clear for the remainder of the game. The next thing you'll need to do is to discard the top bonfire card from the bonfire stack, noting any bonus effect the card gives you, as well as a new maximum hand size. If players had used their heroic ability during the previous battle, they're able to turn the card face up so it can be used again later on. And all equipment and souls that were stored in the loot area can now be transferred to your inventory. And this is now deemed safe and can't be lost. Players can now gain these new equipment cards by adding them to their deck, but you must work together to decide who gets what. The souls you have can then be used to buy upgraded stamina cards. Now in the stamina market area, the cards in the top row cost 2 souls and show 2 different stamina icons, where once played, the hero gets to choose which one of these icons they're going to use. The stamina cards in the bottom row cost 5 souls and also show 2 stamina icons, but here when the card is used it generates 1 of each of the stamina symbols. Now once equipment is distributed between the heroes and the party has spent souls to gain the stamina cards, they can start adding these to their decks. However, players need to ensure they do not exceed the maximum deck size as indicated on the newly revealed bonfire card. From a player's deck, basic stamina cards can be removed, as well as any equipment of that character's choice where it's placed back into the inventory. Therefore, any of this removed equipment can be claimed by another player. There may be times when adding stamina and equipment cards to your deck, a hero's draw deck may fall short of this maximum deck size. If this happens, players can top up the deck with remnants of humanity cards. Once players are happy with their deck, they can be shuffled and heroes are ready to explore once again. If the encounter ends in defeat, the players must rest at the bonfire. All steps for choosing to rest at the bonfire are followed with regards to resetting the dungeon or discarding a bonfire card, but in addition, no souls or treasures are gained from the encounter, plus any items in your loot area are discarded. You died. However, you do get to keep any items that were in your inventory that can still be spent at this time. Now, there are 2 bosses in the game that must be defeated in order to win, so let's see how we take them on. Now, when fighting a boss, when you reveal the data card, it's placed in the front middle row of the enemy battle board. If the boss card is double-sided, place it with the fog gate icon face up. And you'll then need to take all of the boss's behaviour cards, shuffle them and place them face down. The boss's health is dependent on the number of players in the game, which in this instance is 6, plus an ongoing special ability. During the boss's activation, you'll draw the top card of the behaviour deck, and this will indicate where the boss moves to, and as with other enemies, where it will attack. This newly placed card will also show an enemy weakness that the heroes can use in their next activation. Once the boss has damage equal to its health, the heroes have defeated this encounter. However, if the boss card is double-sided, you instead flip the card, and they'll need to defeat this side as well. Any excess damage that caused the boss to be flipped does not carry over to this heat-up side. Once the boss has revealed and played 1 behaviour card, the heroes then get to activate as normal. Once the hero activation is complete, the boss will then draw another behaviour card, which again will tell you how it moves and where it attacks. After drawing the last card in the behaviour deck, all you need to do is flip this deck back over and continue drawing. Do not shuffle. If you win the battle, the boss encounter remains cleared for the remainder of the game. You'll gain the number of souls as indicated on the boss data card, as well as gaining a number of powerful transposed weapons, armour or other equipment, and these can be added to your loot pile. If you lose a boss encounter, the dungeon resets and you'll need to make your way back to that boss again. If you defeat both bosses before all bonfire cards are discarded, you win the game. However, if you ever discard the 5th bonfire card, you'll lose the game where heroes die and darkness settles over the land. Now there are a couple of additional rules that need to be implemented when playing with the Seekers of Humanity expansion. When players draw from the common treasure deck, if they ever draw an Ember card, they'll need to draw 1 random invader token and then place its corresponding data card into the corresponding enemy deck where it's then shuffled. Then, when setting up an encounter, if heroes ever draw an invader from the enemy deck, they'll have to defeat the invader and the other enemies in order to win the encounter. Each invader has its own set of behaviour cards, and during the invader's activation, you'll draw and reveal the top card from the behaviour deck. And this will show you where the invader moves, attacks, its weakness and its hit value. Just like the other bosses discussed, the invader's health value is dependent on the number of heroes in the game, and it has an ongoing ability. If you ever need to reveal a behaviour card and the draw deck is empty, simply turn the cards face down without shuffling. If the invader's move takes it into the space of another enemy, simply swap the cards. If the invader is defeated, it is removed from the game. The heroes immediately gain the corresponding invader treasure card straight to their inventory. It bypasses the loot area. Now it's important to note that the invader will be removed from the game, as well as heroes gaining the equipment card, even if they lose the encounter. But if the invader is not defeated, and the heroes lose the encounter, the invader is shuffled back into the enemy deck. So I hope this gives you a better understanding of the game, as the rulebook is a little bit vague and disjointed in areas. When playing solo, I always use 2 characters, and although the base game is very good, the expansions provide a full and epic game. This is Ninja Geek Games. Cheers.